My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, we dive back into the Shrine Project. Our guest for today is Connor Brashar, the brilliant mind behind the game Tales of Cicadia. You can hear more about his game on episode 69. Today, we look at building a shrine that is themed around the swamp and rot, and we ended up calling this one Marshenge. Hopefully this shrine gives you some inspiration to fuel your own games, and let me know in the comments if you have any feedback or things that you would change or add to this shrine. And with that, let's get into the interview. All right. The idea of just some sort of a weird shrine or altar or something that players may find in kind of a fantasy setting. Are there any themes or locations or anything that kind of come to mind for you?
Yeah, actually, I think there's something that I've been really interested in doing history research for my game that in particular is, have you ever heard of a wood henge?
No, I have not.
We're all familiar with Stonehenge. It's this big, monolithic rock outcrop. I guess they used to make what are called wood henges as well, which were the same thing out of wood, and they slowly rot away over time, right? And that's why we don't have most of them left. We only have like the posts. But they were a lot more
Sure.
complex and ornate than the stone ones because they were easier to construct. And so they'd have these really like large scale outcrops of like massive wooden totems that they arrange in specific patterns. And I think the fact that they naturally degrade away into nothing makes me think of like a wood henge in a swamp, where it's covered in moss and it's degrading away. And things are the wood totems have fallen over, and there's challenges I think associated with just even getting into it because it's like sinking now. But something like that is the first thing I thought of when hearing this idea of these shrines in the wilderness.
I really like that idea. So if we have this wood henge thing that's sinking into the swamp, what would have been potentially its origin, or like what was it for, or why was it built essentially?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me that you've got this wooden henge in the swamp. I think people are worshiping a deity here, and perhaps they've got to they were either making sacrifices to it or placing offerings at it in particular, maybe even having celebrations there. That's a wide swath.
How big of an area do you see this as being?
Oh, maybe relatively large, maybe like a quarter of an acre, something like that. But it's now like sinking into the swamp, and so maybe not all of it is clearly visible. Some of it is just obstacles in the water now, and like the deeper ends, players have to navigate that to get into the center.
I like that. If would players be able to detect any sort of like magic or residue of some kind?
Yeah, I think this should just feel charged with like divinity, something that just feels like it's like a holy site lost in time in a sense. So maybe the air is like really quiet here. The bugs that are like normally choking this swamp have like receded and it's just still. Sort of like if you've ever seen Princess Mononoke, that have you ever seen that?
I've seen bits of it, but I haven't actually watched the full thing, unfortunately.
Got it. There's like a lake in there in the middle of this enchanted forest, and it's just dead silent in the process. And I feel like maybe not the visuals of that, but that like feeling of just like reverence that exists in this place, even though the surrounding area is still overgrown and given away to nature again.
So it's kind of like a reverse of the terrain where the the swamp is kind of, I guess I typically associate like rot and curses and stuff with swamp areas. But here inside of this wood henge, we actually have kind of the opposite effect of things are quiet and calm and peaceful.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the question here is it peaceful or are the bugs themselves even afraid of it, right? I think I'm normally very, as like a GM, I normally lean a little grimdark. So I like the haunting sort of quiet idea a little more, I think.
I hadn't thought about it, but the phrase "even the insects may be afraid of it," I think is a good phrase to work with.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Oh, I like that because it feels like if you're going into this, you're going into it with purpose, right? You're going into maybe you're going in to make a sacrifice, right? And so as you head into this thing, it's quiet and you feel like you're about to make some sort of exchange, you know? Like this isn't this, you're about to make a deal here and you feel the weight of that as you enter because everything sort of is afraid of it.
I just really like the idea that like the swamp would be afraid of some part of itself or something that's
Right.
inside of it. So that probably wouldn't like as a visitor to this place, if you're going in here, you probably would be a bit unsettled, right? Trying to get into this or even just moving through this area.
Yeah, almost certainly.
And
Um,
do we think that that would be associated with like the types of sacrifices and stuff that maybe were happening before?
I think yeah, if this has like an altar in the middle, maybe it's as you're rowing in maybe the water, water in swamps kind of murky, gross, but maybe you can just barely make out, like skeletons in it even. So something that sort of like hints to you at what like may have once gone on here, human or animal sacrifice of some kind. I
Okay.
think my party would really laugh at me already for doing this because it's already like very grim dark in a way that like I really lean into too often. But I
I think it's perfect. I love it.
cool. All right.
Okay, so we got skeletons, we've got this altar. If players or anyone, I guess, were to come in and make some sort of a sacrifice, there's bones, so it's probably some sort of like a sacrifice of some sort of a creature or something, right? What what kind of things or what exchange would they maybe be expecting to get for this sacrifice?
Yeah, I think to me this is where the role should come in. That depending on how good of a sacrifice it is, depends on what you get back. But in essence, it's some sort of a divine exchange with maybe like a god or goddess of rot. And so you make an offering to them and they're going to give you something back, and that is like the contract. So it could be patronage, they're going to support you with some divine favors moving forward or give you powers of rot in some way, and those powers' strength is commensurate with what you put into it.
That would the quality of the sacrifice, I assume, have an impact on this? What you get out of it?
Yeah, I think so. If you're sacrificing one of your party members, you should get a lot more than if you sacrifice a good fruit basket. Yeah. And maybe there's something you can learn about what they would like, something to degrade and rot away themselves that you can offer them, but they may have preferences.
I like that. Do we want to state what those preferences are, or do we think we leave that up to like the game master?
Oh, I think let's see. Is there anything that we can think of that is good right here and now? I think that the main thing in my mind is it's something that they want to rot away themselves. And so it can't be something like inert, it can't be a rock of some kind. It's got to be
Yeah,
like something living. But other beyond that, I think the GM's choice in my mind.
just like the higher quality of like if you bring it a sick animal, that's not going to be as good as if you bring some like fully healthy, you know, thing that's in like pristine condition essentially.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, like a cleric of life, for example, like a priest representing the god of life would be like the primo, sacrifice to them. Yeah.
That no, it would be interesting if to use this if there happened to be a church or something nearby, and if you were to have some sort of an encounter with the god or goddess of this place, that they actually request that you bring the priest of the church to them.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, they're making a request for like the specific priest that's trying to like clean up the altar or something, or like is, they've seen from the depths of the swamp sort of moving around trying to bring life and light, and they want that in particular.
Yeah, just because that kind of a priest or cleric would be probably cleansing a lot of the areas of the swamp, or it would kind of would feel like that would be one of their potential goals. So that could I could see that as a
Mhm.
goddess of rot being kind of opposed to them. So
Yeah.
wanting to bring them in, kind of like leaving a note in here for the GM to say, if the players decide to communicate with this god or goddess, that they will make this request for this person that's kind of been competing with them a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. I think I might. So I really like the idea of this like decay cycle, decay and rebirth in a sense, right? And so maybe the spirit or goddess of rot that embodies this place is like in love with the cleric of life, you know? So it's not like a hatred, it's more like an appreciation for and like a desire to rot it away as like an affection. Something alien like that, you know, where they don't see the death and rot as like a bad thing. They're not trying to be evil. They're just sort of alien in that aspect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So I'm trying to think, what do the players get out of it for helping, or even for not helping? I mean, we could kind of give a branching path option, right? To say, well, if you do
Yeah.
this thing and you bring the priest, then this thing happens. But if you go to the priest and then, somehow destroy the wood henge, then what happens?
Yeah, I think I like that idea a lot of this two option outcome here. I mean, I think you destroy your Woodhenge, you could have like a, you know, the priest is thankful and may have an offering for you in exchange, maybe like a, you know, like a magic sword of light or something that can guide your way. Something sufficiently fantasy tropey like that. And then I think maybe if you make this sacrifice, it's got to be a bigger reward because you're not only doing more work, but you're doing something kind of murder hobo-y or nasty. So maybe your reward here is patronage from the spirit. So some sort of a totem that would let you, you know, call upon their powers of rot in some sense. So like you could see that as in like a traditional D&D way, it could be like an item of death touch, maybe, where you can rot somebody away with a touch, or you maybe even, you know, it's like a way to gain divine powers in a limited way that are related to rot.
So let me know what you think of this idea. When you mentioned the like totem and the patronage thing, I almost thought of having this little like wood hinge totem, and if you went and took that somewhere and like placed it and then prayed or whatever to the totem, that area would also become like another like wood hinge area and potentially start rotting away at that location.
Oh, I like that a lot. Like it's you're sort of like reverse hallowing the ground in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So you can take this totem and plant it and create this region of rot that, you know, everything nearby like decays rapidly away or more rapidly than usual, maybe not immediate, and it creates this sort of ground that furthers their aim. Yeah.
It'd be an interesting item in that, in the right scenario, could be extremely useful.
Yeah.
But also there's some like dangers to playing around with it too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the idea of this juxtaposition. I feel like players should know what they might get, not necessarily from the spirit, but they should know about the sword maybe or whatever the gift would be from the light spirit. So they know what's in hand in one and the other one's sort of like an unknown strangeness. So when they get the totem, you know, they have this weird thing that they now get to use, but maybe they've made that decision to go for this weird unknown thing rather than the known sword.
Right, like the spirit of rot is extremely vague and is like, well, I'll give you this thing, but doesn't really
Yeah.
explain it. But then this cleric or whoever is like, well, I've got this magic sword,
Yeah.
or this shield or whatever.
Yeah.
If you can just help me get rid of this thing, then that'd be great. You can have it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the help me get rid of this in particular. It sounds like the priest is like more than willing to go with you into this swamp, right? Like you're not having to convince them to come into the altar to sacrifice. You're just bringing them in. They're like, "Yeah, let's go deal with this problem together." You got to bring them in and it's super easy to get them there. So now the question is, well, I've got the priest here. Do I kill them in sacrifice to the spirit or do they help them destroy the altar? Like which one of these do I want to do? You're stuck in that moment because everything sort of propelled you here.
Yeah, I really like that, and I'm wondering if we don't even need like mechanics for this. It's more so the mechanics and the interaction piece is the that decision of, do you go in and and bring this cleric in, or do you not, or do you just completely, leave the area altogether and just ignore it? You know,
Yeah.
I think the trigger being once you get into the middle of this woodhenge thing, like the spirit just comes up and starts asking you for help to like get this cleric and stuff in, and then that's kind of the propelling. Okay, now she's talking to you.
Yeah.
Do we go? Do we help her? Do we now? You go talk to the cleric, and now he's wants something else.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I think that introduction too, I feel like you could approach it from either way, right? You can meet the priest and maybe they don't know exactly what it is yet, but they know something's wrong with it, so they ask you to go investigate. You go, you meet the other one, right? So you can approach it from either angle, and I think it still works. And in both cases, I think you're really sort of getting embroiled into this thing you don't have to stay with, but sure can.
well, and I
Um,
could see this even. This would be, I feel like, a fairly simple thing that you could throw in a that you could throw into an adventure, and it wouldn't necessarily even take that much time to resolve
yeah,
this little side quest thing. I mean, you could spend either an entire session or you could spend, 15, 20 minutes just like talking through it and then you're
right.
done. If you
Yeah,
wanted to make it quick, right? It doesn't have to be this big complicated thing, but it
yeah,
definitely has some interesting outcomes.
yeah, definitely. I agree. I really like the idea of a totem that rots away an area, like a corruption totem of some kind. I just think that sounds like such a fun potential for a game. I picture like putting it in like the middle of a big wheat field, and like you make like this like huge like all the wheat rots in like 100-yard radius around you. So this big circular like devastation in the middle of a wheat field, and it's got like all this strange like quietude and the strange like mythical feeling in it as soon as you've planted it, and people coming around from nearby are just like the impact that that's going to have. It just sounds really weird. And I think the niche situations where it's going to come useful are strange, but I think that sounds really fun.
I like it. I think we've come up with some good stuff here. Is there anything you would like to add to this before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, let's see. Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you so much for helping me out with this. Oh my gosh. We have to name it. We didn't name it.
Uh, hmm. The it's this mythical altar in the woods that is like an unknown altar in a sense, right? Like it's like a mystical spirit or something from so long ago that nobody here knows what it is really. So I think it should be like some simple name that's just vaguely descriptive, like the Marshenge or something, where people are like, oh, that's the Marshenge out in the swamps. We don't know what it does, but steer clear. That's sort of my thought. I don't know if you like that.
Yeah, Marshenge works for me. I was even thinking I guess we could go back to just Woodhenge as well, but I do like Marshenge being as it's more of a swampy thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I like that.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed putting this one together with you, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Brock. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.